Vermont's landscape of church spires is iconic, but we're considered one of the least religious states in the country. So what's the real story of religion in Vermont? A team of UVM researchers and students is investigating, and we're learning more today on Across the Fence. Hello, Vermont. Here's a question. How often do you attend religious services? And if you don't attend, but nonetheless have a belief system or consider yourself spiritual, does that mean you are not religious? According to the Pew Research Center, only 13% of adult Vermonters consider themselves highly religious, which is why Vermont ranks as the least religious state in the country. But my guests today suspect that existing labels and descriptions might not fully explain the practices or beliefs of Vermonters. So with a new grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, they're beginning to explore the myriad landscape of faith, however it's expressed in the state. Joining me are Tom Burchert and Elise Morgenstein-Furst from UVM's Department of Religion. Ironically, the only department of religion at a public university in New England, an interesting data point on irreligious Vermont. So Dr. Dr. Borchert, Dr. Morgenstein-Furst, thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
In fact, we can even just start there. So UVM's Department of Religion is an anomaly in New England, and I find that a little fascinating. What does religious studies or scholarship look like at the university?
We work on the secular study of religion. So if you're thinking CCD, Hebrew school, that is not what we're doing. We are thinking about how to talk about this massive, complex set of systems, so individual religions, but also just the structure of religion as another system. So think of it like a system like gender or a system like race, a system of power that structures how we identify in the world. So we study
lens
it
through which we understand things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So why do we think socioculturally about religion? Why do our laws sound kind of Protestant in their structure? That's one of the things that we think about when we think about the study of religion, not just how people do their faith practices, but also why and when and where.
And I thought this was interesting because we were chatting a little bit beforehand, and you both and your co-PI, all of you also focus on religious practices or religion in international context. Is that right? Yeah, tell me a little bit about what you study.
So I work in both Thailand and China, and one of the things that we also spend a lot of time with I'll get back to the point, but one of the things that we also spend a lot of our time in classes thinking about, and this is where many of our classes start, is what are we talking about when we're talking about religion?
Yeah.
Because it's a word that we all use every day, and we think we know what it means, but it's a pretty unstable category, and different types of people, different state actors or academics or people on the street are using it in ways that overlap but are a little bit different. And so when I study religion in China, the Chinese government has a very specific understanding of religion which focuses on the worship of supernatural beings. And so what they really care about is not meaning at all, but what people are doing when they're doing something that they call religion. And so then they regulate it in a very particular kind of way. That's different from the way that most of us think about and talk about religion in the United States, but not totally.
No, not totally. Well, and that was going to lead me to my semantic question, which is, so we've got, what's the difference between religion, faith, and spirituality? Because I think these are three terms. When I describe myself, I would say that I don't think of myself as religious. I do not attend church. I was raised Catholic, but I do think of myself as a very spiritual person and a faithful person. So all those words mean something different to me. What do the definitions mean? What do the distinctions mean? And are they even important?
That's a fabulous question that both of us spend truly whole semesters on. So to give you the really too long didn't listen, it actually has a lot to do with where you're from. So quite a lot of Americans use religion and faith interchangeably because quite a lot of Americans come from Christian or post-Christian backgrounds for whom those things really are connected. But for people like Jews and Muslims and some other denominations, faith is actually the least important thing. It's what are you doing? Are your actions
practice,
doing the work? And so we tend to tell students, and we'll tell our audience today, that those words really do mean specific things in specific contexts, but for our purposes, the differences are both interesting and sort of negligible, because how you are doing some practice that we might order in the framework of religion matters more to us as researchers than exclusively how you would define it yourself. That's like second order data. First order data is, are you doing stuff that in any other generation we might call religious?
Interesting. Okay, so now I'm seeing how this is going to lead. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please do.
If we listen to journalism or read journalism that talks about religion, journalists often use the word faith as a shorthand, meaning religious institutions or institutional complexes, and that's fine. It's a shorthand, and but shorthands also hide a bunch of stuff, and so the word faith tends to emphasize dynamics of meaning and belief systems, and makes it harder for us to see the kind of institutional structures and the practices that people do, where they're not necessarily meaningful, but they're things that people do on a regular basis. And so that word faith is actually really misleading in some ways. It's a shorthand that hides a bunch of stuff. And so it's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's partial.
Yeah.
And its partiality tends to be obfuscatory.
Yeah.
It hides a bunch of stuff.
Well, thinking about hiding things, so now I'm thinking about Vermont and this idea of Vermont as being a very non-religious state. So I mean, is these types of distinctions and factors, is that something that is coming into, like when the Pew Research Center can say that only 13% of Vermonters identify as highly religious? Like, what do we think that means?
Yeah, I think that's exactly. So Pew tends to rely, like a lot of other data collecting institutes, relies on things that can be counted. So we can count how many times you go to church or don't go to church in a month. And it's harder to ask you to quantify how many times you were outside and felt really connected. And connected to what? But I think we are really interested in how Vermonters are expressing, whether that's connection or community or identity, all of those things which overlap but don't mean exactly the same thing. We're interested in kind of scraping beneath that. Well, no, I don't go to church. I'm not highly religious. That seems sort of facile.
Yes, it's like it's too easy of an explanation for what's going on, but it doesn't give you the full picture about what that person's relationship with something larger than themselves.
If you've been to Mount Philo on a Sunday morning, there are people communing with nature. They are mindfully talking to the world around them. They are sometimes doing yoga in a practice way, which is another conversation altogether about religion and appropriation. But I think we miss those folks in this data, and because Vermont's so small, we know those folks. We are those folks. And so there's a more interesting story to tell than the story we've been able to tell so far.
It's a mystery. Lovely to have you with us. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
And Dr. Borcher, so you also had a previous study, right, where you mapped like religious institutions in Vermont.
Yeah.
How did that lead to this new study, or these new questions?
So let me start actually a little bit further back, which is that I was sitting in my office one day and I was curious about something about Vermont. And I went to the library website and I put in religion and Vermont, and nothing came up. Like, there was no knowledge that had been created about religion in Vermont. And so I started chatting with my colleagues, like, oh, do you know what's going on? Do you have any idea? And so part of the problem, actually, if we think about something like the Pew surveys, the Pew surveys are actually, that top line number about the 13% is like, oh my gosh, what's going on in Vermont? We're so secular. We're a bunch of, or pagans.
I don't know what we are, right, exactly, yes.
But the Pew data is actually messier, because the top line, highly religious, but like, what do we do with people who are religious but not highly religious? Do they count?
Yeah.
And also, going back to Elise's point about what people are doing, the Pew stuff has people, the Pew surveys talk about people doing things that are they pray or they think about God or they, right? And so that top line number is almost the only one that we pay attention to. And it is messier. And so if we take those two things together, we really don't actually know much at all about what is going on in Vermont. And so the first thing that I was trying to figure out is, what are some of the things that are out there?
Yeah.
We don't know what's out there, so we're trying to figure out what's out there.
So that's a good way to, because now we only have a couple more minutes to talk about the grant, but I want to hear about, so talk to me about this new grant and how you are going to be training students to go out and do this different type of data collection in order to, I think you called it fixing the numbers, or at least give us a better understanding of the numbers.
Fixing the numbers makes it sound like I'm rigging the books, but well, so this NEH grant, which we are really thrilled and honored to win, is a massive federal grant that will help the three of us teach students. So we're developing a curriculum. So there'll be a class that students can take that'll train students in how to do archival and ethnographic work so that we can place them in community settings around the state to do that work, either with partner institutions or with other organizations that we haven't yet identified. And then we also have, it's a 3-year plan. So that's year 1. Year 2 is like sending students out. Training students is year 1, sending students out is year 2, and year 3 is sort of like, what do we do with all this data that we've collected?
And I know you're going to try to get them into some internship positions.
So one of the first things that we're going to do is, 1, we're going to create the class, but 2, we're going to try to create a network of organizations and institutions that have work for students to do, right? And so again, part of this, I think there are 2 things. One, when we think about humanities and the qualitative social sciences,
We only have a couple seconds, so go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. We tend to think about professors doing work on their own, and we think about the natural sciences as a type of lab. And what we're doing is we're trying to create a lab where students create foundational knowledge that we can then take and analyze.
So much great work.
So one of the things we need to do is we need to figure out where we can send people.
Yeah.
And so we're going to create
This is
that
where
network
this is where that map of the institutions of Vermont really comes into play.
That's right.
This is such a fascinating topic. Obviously, we could continue talking about it for a long time, but thank you guys both for joining me today. It's been wonderful. And as always, thank you, Vermont, for learning and exploring with me today. And thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Fenley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.